So we're going to start by drawing just the lines that I outlined in red, and all we're paying attention to is angles and distances. So we're thinking this line is a little bit, just a little bit off of vertical, a couple degrees. And in a minute we're going to check to find our center to make sure that we can fit this on the page. We should probably do that sooner rather than later, so let me go ahead and do that. It is very important that you don't run off the bottom of the page, and we've all had that experience. It's very discouraging. So if I look over here and do a little measuring, I can see that the center of this figure is, why don't you check, try to find a landmark that's in the exact center. If we go from the bottom of the toes to the top of the head, and let me know what you come up with. I'm coming up with a very clear landmark for the center. Yeah, the wrist. Very good. So if we mark where that is over here, that this should be our center. Here's the bottom of the drawing, and here's the top of the drawing. So we can see that the center is just a little bit above this plane change at the back of the butt. So that means our center should be about here, top of the head about here, bottom of that forward toe about here. So try to make sure you're still on your page and check those distances. And then we are going to go back. Another really useful idea is the idea of a plumb line. If we pull a plumb line straight down from the bottom of the chin, notice we end up at going through the wrist, and we land on the toe, outside toe of that leading foot. So that's going to help us with some of these landmarks. But I don't want to see anyone committing to any locations yet. And what the workshop instructor did was, in order to keep what he called some dither in the drawing. Dithering is like it's avoiding those commitments. It's like allowing for some play in the drawing, like you can still adjust things. Instead of just using a single line, every line he made was sort of like you see me doing here, is like a bunch of little lines. It's not a habit that I'm sure I'm gonna continue encouraging, but I'm just making myself try it today. I'm still trying to figure out how I like it, but and you want to glance back and forth between your drawing and the things you're looking at today. You see what I'm doing is changing a couple locations. And notice I really have not done any internal lines yet, except for this plumb line. And you're really trying to teach yourself to see things a little differently, just as an arrangement of straight lines. Here I see a pretty major thing I missed, is that this shoulder's a bit higher than this one. So I'm just going to adjust that. And it's kind of mind-blowing when you see people. The way some people work is they will spend 2 to 3 hours on this stage. Like, they will keep adjusting these lines until and they will keep measuring everything and make sure that the envelope, like the container for the drawing, is perfect before they go on to the next step. And that is something I obviously am not in the habit of doing, but it's important to realize that when you see work that looks photorealistic, they're using strategies that are different from the kind of strategies that we could even possibly use in a class like this. So I'm going to go ahead now with some of the internal lines. I'm going to keep adding lines over here so you can see exactly how I'm thinking about it, and simplifying pretty radically, but beginning to represent the limbs. Be sure that wrist is right on your center line. And we've got this hand for shortened forearm, and I'm going to block in the shape of the hand as simply as possible. And it really is true that if you can train yourself to see things a little more this way in terms of angles and ratios, that kind of fractional thinking I'm always talking about, where this line's about half as long as this line, this angle is a lot shallower than this angle, and you're just always comparing distances and angles. It will help a lot with your accuracy. What this kind of drawing lacks at this stage is what I call fluidity. Like, notice that we're intentionally avoiding any really graceful or fluid lines. We're just sort of hacking away at it in a way that is aesthetically not very appealing, perhaps, but is, I think, part of the problem is starting off with what I call a calligraphic line, like a line that has a beautiful flowing, it does multiple directional changes and really describes a lot. Is you make that beautiful line and then you realize it's in the wrong place, you're going to be reluctant to fix it. It's like you already did this beautiful thing and you don't want to change it because you're already committed to it. And if all we limit ourselves to is these kind of ugly, straight, angled lines, we really have no motional problem like moving something around and putting it in a different place. Or we shouldn't. And at this point, you should begin to see the gesture. And if you put your plumb line down and you used it properly, you should see that she appears pretty well balanced, like she's holding her own weight, not falling over one way or the other. Notice I added these lines, this negative space, and I added the bottom of the chin and the top of the neck, top of the head. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to catch up. So I'm going to make a couple corrections in mine that I noticed when I was coming around. Mainly, was it this angle was a little off?
On the other one's more
That this, yeah, this is a shallower angle, right? It's like more like that. Okay, so the next step is going to be, we're going to do the same approach to the big shadow shapes. So we're going to be blocking in what you see me outlining here, and this not a lot of big shadow shapes on this drawing. So, and that's going to help us see our proportions better, because when we can see things in light and dark, we can read proportions more easily. So I'm going to start with this little shape here, and as I go, I'm going to go ahead and throw a first shading in there, and then I'm going to put one down here. As great as it is to draw live people, a lot of the advantage is, I think, is psychological. And what I mean is that when you have somebody who's working very hard to pose for you, you know you're not allowed to take a picture of the model, so you're never going to see this again. And you have a lot of empathy for the work the model's doing. They're actually suffering a little. They're kind of uncomfortable, and they're doing that for you, for your benefit, so that you can appreciate the human form. And that all comes together into like a more focused kind of energy than most of us are able to muster when we are just like doing a copy like today, or drawing from a photograph. I just noticed that my simplification right here kind of missed this little indent, so I'm going to add that just so the drawing starts to make sense. And at this point in the process, once we've created our envelope and kind of blocked things in, feel free to take a few measurements. Beyond, we found center, double check, make sure your center is still in the right place. But you can take some lateral measurements if you want and just start to compare like the breadth of the shoulders, and that should be about 2 heads across, because this is about 4 heads. She's about an 8-head figure. But what we're going to do over on the side now is a little schematic to help us understand the pose better. You can do it the same size or smaller, and we're going to be thinking about the angle that we're seeing the head at. We're obviously looking up at the head, so I'm just going to represent the head as a box that I'm looking up at. Now I'm looking for clues to the turn of the rib cage, and I'm going to represent that as another box. It's sternum is off to the left, so that means that the box of the rib cage is turned to our left, and even though we're looking up at it, it's tipped a little forward, so I'm going to represent it pretty much as if it was at our eye level. And go ahead and draw this. You can put it off to one side. As I said, you could draw it smaller if you want.